You're tuned into the Spot Up Pod, the official podcast of the Spot Up Shot newsletter. I'm your host, Paul Garcia. Welcome back to another episode of the Spot Up Pod. Thank you all for joining once again for a new episode. I last recorded about a week ago, and there hasn't been too many Spurs games because of the NBA Cup. So the Spurs only had 2 games this past week since I last recorded. So let's review how they did in these last 2 games. So let's go back to Friday. The Spurs are on the road at Portland. They are favored by 3.5, but they were missing a few players on their rotation. The Spurs were missing Stephon Castle, Keldon Johnson, Zach Collins, and Trey Jones. And then you could also throw in that they were missing Chris Paul because he ended up getting ejected very early in the first quarter. So their most of their lead ball handlers were out of this game. The Blazers were missing DeAndre Ayton and Robert Williams III as well. And the Spurs needed a big comeback to win this game against Portland. They ended up winning by 2 points. San Antonio did. So let's go through a quick breakdown of this game. So it was pretty close for the first 3 quarters. The Spurs did hold a 10-point lead after halftime. Then in the fourth quarter, Portland ended up getting their lead up to 17 points, as I mentioned, and the Spurs made another comeback, their fourth 17-point comeback of the season, where they came back and out-executed Portland in crunch time. Julian Champagnie hit some big threes in crunch time. Jeremy Sochan played some good defense on Anthony Simons. He also had some ball handling, getting the Spurs into their sets. Wemby was clutch from the free throw line in crunch time. He went 4 of 4 when Portland put him on the line, and he also drew some free throws. And then Devin Vassell hit a key mid-ranger there in crunch time. And so, it was really the Spurs' play in crunch time and also their fight. They didn't just give up even when they were down by 17 points. So like I mentioned, they made their fourth 17-point comeback so far this season. They are now 4-10 when down by 15 points. Obviously not a good record, but the fact that they've made 4 comebacks when down by 15 points is notable. And just the fact that they've really turned around their crunch time play, so far through 10 crunch time games, they are now 7-3, which is the second best record in the NBA. So again, they're really turned around one of those areas where they used to fall apart last season. They were a bottom 5 team in crunch time record a year ago, and now they're really out executing teams there in the final 5 minutes when it is a close game. And some key 3 players for this game were Wemby. Like I mentioned, he had 28 points on the night for San Antonio. Again, his free throw shooting is notable in crunch time, where he's now a perfect 12 of 12 in the final 5 minutes when the team is either ahead or behind by 5 points. So far this season to lead the Spurs in free throw makes during crunch time. Devin Vassell had a big game off the bench with 23 points, and then Champagnie, like I mentioned, had 19 points there against Portland. So that was the first game on Friday. Then on Sunday, the Spurs were back home hosting the Minnesota Timberwolves. They ended up losing this game by 14 points. So the Wolves, I do want to note, were favored by 4.5 points in this game. They had most of their core rotation players available except for Joe Ingles. The Spurs were without Zach Collins, Keldon Johnson, and Trey Jones from their rotation. And so basically, Minnesota pretty much controlled the entire game. They actually went into halftime with a 15-point lead. The Spurs did fight back, fueled by defense. And then also Harrison Barnes got hot from 3 in the corners, where the Spurs got within 3 points of the Wolves' lead in the third quarter. So going into the fourth quarter, the Spurs were only down by 6 points. So this looked like, hey, maybe there's a 5th comeback coming here soon, with the Spurs down by 15 points. But it wasn't in the cards. Spurs went cold again in the fourth quarter. Early on, the Wolves started to get some buckets to go in. And so basically the Spurs were facing a 16-point deficit with 6.5 minutes left. And basically by the 3-minute mark of the fourth quarter, the Spurs were facing a 20-point hole. And so Coach Johnson, called it a night. He took out all the starters, and then the reserves went in. They played a little bit better, the reserves, and they actually got it to a more respectable loss because the Spurs were down by as many as 23 points, but they ended up losing just by 14 points. And like I mentioned, it was really the offense that really, had a tough night here. And you do want to give credit to the Wolves' defense. They do have a top 10 defense. Minnesota, they apply a lot of ball pressure. Obviously, it's hard to get attempts in the rim with Rudy Gobert down there, kind of manning the paint. And so we did see the Spurs score a season-low 92 points. They only drew 9 free throw attempts, and they made just a season-low 7 free throws. They also had a cold night shooting from 3, where they went 24% from beyond the arc. Almost everyone had a tough shooting night from distance, except for Harrison Barnes, who went 4 of 7. And then, like I mentioned, the Wolves' defense really forced the Spurs into a lot of different turnovers. And so that was pretty much a big part of the Spurs' troubles on the night, was 19 turnovers that resulted in 30 points for the Wolves. 3 key players in this game for the Spurs were Wemby. He had 20 points, 12 rebounds, 5 assists, and 7 blocks. His third game this season with 7 or more blocks. Jeremy Sochan started, who I'm going to talk about here in terms of starting. He started there back at the power forward spot, and he finishes with 17 points and 15 rebounds. And then Harrison Barnes, like I mentioned, he had a pretty quiet first half, but then in the third quarter, he really got going there for San Antonio to help them fuel that comeback. He ends up with 17 points as well on the night on just 10 shot attempts, but the Spurs did end up losing. So basically, Vegas had said they were supposed to go 1-1, and they basically followed suit. They went 1-1 here in these two games. So again, it was just two games. Not a lot going on this past week in terms of ball games because of where the schedule's at right now. So now I want to just kind of look quickly through where the Spurs are through 26 games. I will do a deeper dive on once they get to the 30 game mark, but right now I'm just going to go through some base numbers here. So they are 13-13 overall. So again, 500 basketball club. You considering they've played a lot of Western Conference teams, that ties them right now as I'm recording this on Monday evening, before a lot of the games have finished. That ties them with the Kings for 11th out west, but the Spurs are ahead according to the standings. And so just one thing that Victor was mentioned was that, this just feels a lot different right now. The fact that the Spurs are basically in that mix of like playoff teams or like play-in range teams, it feels a lot different according to Victor. He said something along the lines of, we're part of the stacked Western Conference, basically. And basically what he's saying here is that, a year ago, at the 26 game mark, the Spurs were 4-22. I mean, they were clearly out of the playoff picture. They had no chance there. And now the fact that they're a 500 ball club and, and at times their record is actually over 500, and then it might drop a little bit. They are right there in that mix of basically being right on the verge of being a play-in team or getting, the Western Conference, the teams are so close in this race right now that you could just basically be a playoff team if you just get a few more wins above 500. So again, that's something that notable that Wemby said. Something that Harrison Barnes mentioned was that he basically said that, as of this point, 26 games, he says that the team now knows their blueprint for how to get wins right now. Obviously, it's not easy to get wins every night, but they know what they need to do, and if they do those things right, they have a good chance at winning ball games. Just where they're at in their numbers, they're 17th on offense, so they've actually improved here a little bit. So scoring at 111.4 points per 100. Their defense, though, as we've seen the last few weeks, has really slipped. They're now 19th defensively, scoring 113.8 points per 100, and then their net rating is 17th, barely being outscored by 2.4 points per 100 possessions. The quarters are the same thing. Where first quarter they really struggle. They're getting outscored by 15 points per 100, which is 28th in the league. Second quarter they claw back a little bit. They're only losing that quarter by minus 4.8 points per 100, which is 22nd. Third quarter, they dominate there, and obviously that helped them get back in the game against Minnesota on Sunday. So they're outscoring opponents by 11.2 points per 100, which is sixth, the best in the NBA. And then the fourth quarter, before the Minnesota game, that Portland game when they made that comeback, the 17-point comeback, that actually helped the Spurs' number here. They were actually even in fourth quarters, but then since Minnesota took control on Sunday, the Spurs are now a minus 1.2 points per 100 in fourth quarters, which is 17th. So again, the fourth is pretty much, it can kind of flip-flop at times, but the Spurs have been better in fourth quarters. They're barely losing that quarter. And so that's just kind of a picture of where the Spurs are at through 26 games. Some other news that we heard was that Coach Pop released a statement, just kind of updating, not really giving an update on his progress, but he just mainly he and his family wanted to thank a lot of people. So the Spurs put out a statement on behalf of Coach Pop on Monday afternoon. It basically, I'll put the full statement on the video portion if you all watch this on YouTube, but basically I'm going to get to just a few lines here. That's from the statement. He says, while I wish I could get back to each one of you, for now, let me say that my family and I are forever grateful. We're thankful for our wonderful community, the entire Spurs organization, and our family and friends. So basically, Coach Pop's just basically he and his family are, thanking everyone for their support as he's going through this process of trying to get back and recovering from the mild stroke that he had back in early November. And then he also, I want to read this verbatim, Coach Pop, because this is just, he ends this note on a Coach Pop kind of way. So he says this: "No one is more excited to see me return to the bench than the talented individuals who have been leading my rehabilitation process. They've quickly learned that I'm less than coachable." So there's Coach Pop, ending his statement with a little bit of Coach Pop, Coach Popism, I guess, or Coach Pop way. And so that's good to see. That's good to hear from Coach Pop that he's definitely trying to get back to the bench, get back to the court. And so obviously we hope for the best for his recovery and that he can get back as soon as possible with the team. So that was just a quick update on Coach Pop, who put out a statement earlier on Monday. All right, so our big topic here for this episode is it's a question of the lineup. So now that I know that players are still kind of in and out at times, the Spurs are starting to get a little bit more healthy. Obviously, they went through a swing there against the Pelicans where they lost a few players, but then some players came back. And so it was just interesting to see in that game against Minnesota that the Spurs had a healthy Stephon Castle returning, plus they had a healthy Jeremy Sochan, and so that begins the question of who was going to start. Data wise, the numbers had all said that that there's strong evidence numbers wise that the lineup, the starting lineup with Chris Paul, Stephon Castle, Julian Champagnie, Harrison Barnes, and Wemby, that's a really good lineup data wise. But then, it was interesting because Minnesota plays more of a traditional model with two different bigs. They have, Rudy Gobert at the 5. They have Julius Randle at the 4. So it was understandable if the Spurs did come out with having Jeremy Sochan start instead of Castle, despite what the data says. And so that's actually what happened. The Spurs, started Sochan. He pretty much guarded a lot, most of the game. He was guarding Julius Randle. He did a good job on him defensively. Really stuck with him in the post. Really, applied pressure. Randle only ended up with, I think, 11 points, which is lower than his usual season average. And so that's kind of where I want to go with this for two reasons. One, there's an argument with what the data says, because I'm going to go through some numbers here. And like I said, they're just numbers, but they're showing, strong evidence that with Castle starting into the Spurs, statistically at least are showing that they're a better ball club. And then also I'm going to go through what coach Spurs acting head coach Mitch Johnson said about Sochan, whether or not he'll be starting going forward. So let's first dive into this topic here regarding the numbers. So I do want to note that all these numbers do come from cleaningtheglass.com. And I will put a picture of some of these numbers online if you watch it on the video, if you watch it on the video. So let's begin with possessions. The Castle lineup has gotten more possessions. They've played that lineup, that starting five has had 309 possessions together, whereas the Sochan lineup, which is basically the same starters and then just Sochan in there instead of Castle, that lineup has only had 201 possessions together. So there's definitely more opportunity with the Castle lineup because of how long Sochan was out due to his left thumb injury. Defensively, they're pretty much, they're kind of the same here. They're not one's not too far ahead of the other. So basically, the Castle lineup is a little bit better, allowing 107.5 points per 100, which is in the 69th percentile, whereas the Sochan lineup is allowing 110 points per 100, 60th percentile. So again, not too far away, 60th and 67th. So again, defensively, they're both really good defensive lineups. Obviously, you get better perimeter defense, out on guards and wings when you have Castle starting, and then when you have Sochan guarding, playing defense, you can guard more bigs inside or bigger power forwards, or Sochan has that versatility to also guard up top if he needs to, depending on the matchup. So again, defensively, there's not really an issue here. It's more so the offensive end is where we see the huge difference between these two lineups. So with Castle, the Spurs are scoring 125.6 points per 100, 80th percentile. Again, 80th percentile, right there, close, all the way almost to the 100th percentile. With Sochan in the starting lineup, they're scoring 103 points per 100, 6th percentile. So again, very much toward the bottom of the league in terms of data wise offensively. So what are the numbers saying in terms of what are the differences here? So in terms of scoring, and I'm gonna look at the 4 factors here. Scoring, the Spurs are in the 80th percentile at Castle. With Sochan, they're in the 6th percentile. So obviously struggling there. Shooting, this is an effective field goal, which combines the 3-point shot with the 2-point shot. They're in the 76th percentile shooting with Castle, whereas with Sochan, they're in the 16th percentile. So obviously very, very cold shooting statistics whenever Sochan's in the lineup there. Turnover percentage. They're in the 76th percentile with Castle, obviously another ball handler alongside Chris Paul who can kind of manage the ball, run some pick and roll, DHO kind of actions. So that's a very good lineup in terms of taking care of the ball, 76th percentile. When it's Sochan, the turnover percentage is in the 24th percentile. So again, very, very much struggling. Offensive rebounding, this is a strength for the Sochan lineup. So with the Castle, that lineup has the offensive rebound percentage is in the 41st percentile. So basically slightly below league average, not too concerning, but obviously they're going to be better at rebounding their own misses with Sochan, the Spurs are. So with Sochan, that lineup is in the 64th percentile, with Sochan. So obviously, a lot better statistically with Jeremy. So again, offensively is the big issue where the Spurs are going to have to make that decision of whether they want to go with Castle and Sochan. And just kind of what I've seen observation wise, I know that both players obviously don't shoot the ball quite accurately from 3. Castle's just is accuracy wise better than Sochan in terms of his accuracy so far this season, and he's also not afraid to take more threes. So Castle takes 4.2 3-point attempts per game. He's making 27% of them. Again, not an efficient number. Whereas Sochan's only taking 1.6 3-point attempts and only making 19% of them. Again, he doesn't take a lot, but also his number also isn't as efficient. Usage wise, they almost have the exact same usage. Castle's usage is at 21.6% of the Spurs' possessions, whereas Sochan's is at 21.5%. It's almost identical, like I mentioned. And so basically what I see offensively, again, that's where I'm kind of focusing here, is with Castle, the Spurs have more opportunities to if he's off the ball, he's going to spread out. He can set picks and rolls. He can try to step out from outside. Obviously, defense are going to leave him open, but he will take three. And then the big thing is that he gives them another lead ball handler. He also gives them a better chance of getting to the free throw line. That's a number I forgot to mention here. With Castle in the lineup, that's starting five. The Spurs' free throw rate is in the 58th percentile, so basically slightly above league average. When it's Sochan out there in the starting five, the Spurs' free throw rate is in the 17th percentile. So obviously toward the bottom there of the league in terms of that number. And so again, I think that's one part of it, is that Castles can be a lead ball handler. He can run sets for your offense. He can run pick and roll. He can be involved in screen action. He can get to the free throw line on his drives, like I mentioned before. So I think he just gives the Spurs more opportunity offensively to either create for himself or others, whereas Sochan, he's more so dependent on other players kind of helping him create, or him using his energy off ball when defenses are guarding him to kind of crash the glass, roll, be in the dunker spot. So he's still taking advantage of it, being productive, scoring in the paint, but obviously he's not creating as much for himself or the team or his teammates when he's out there. So I think that's just observation wise what I see. And then when we just look at what these lineups look like compared to the rest of the league, here's where it becomes really stark. So lineups that have over 200 possessions together, okay? This lineup with Castle is the fourth best lineup in the NBA right now out of 33 lineups. So again, lineups that have played over 200 possessions, 33 lineups total in the NBA have done that. And this lineup is fourth best in the league in terms of their net rating at plus 18.1 points per 100. The Sochan lineup, again, over 200 possessions. That lineup out of 33 teams or 33 lineups is 30th. So again, bottom of the league here in terms of those lineups that have had 200 possessions together. So again, statistically, this data is saying that the Castle lineup, is better statistically. I mean, far better. Obviously, fourth best in the league, whereas the Sochan lineup is toward the bottom there, 30th out of 33. Now I do want to say some things here, because even though these are just numbers, sometimes the numbers may not match the eye test. And here's why I think that the numbers don't match the eye test. I think when we go back to the first quarter scoring, both groups struggle. I mean, the Spurs, like I said, their first quarter net rating is minus 15. They're getting outscored by points per 100 possessions. So regardless if Castle starting or Sochan, a lot of times that the team does struggle to get off to good starts. So, it's not, you can't just say that it's just, one player makes a huge difference there. And obviously the third quarter, they really rebound. So I think that's one part that maybe the data doesn't capture as well, is the fact that whether Sochan starting or Castle starting, the team still struggles in first quarters starting up ball games. I also wonder if the Spurs may continue with more some matchup dependent lineups, where like against the Wolves, right? They have Julius Randle, who's a big. They need more size in the front court alongside Wemby. So maybe that's why the Spurs went with Sochan. Maybe against another team, maybe like someone like the Warriors, the Spurs play like the Warriors again, and they have more shooters out there. They need someone to be a primary defender on Steph Curry. Maybe Castle gets to start on those kind of nights. So again, I do wonder too if going forward, whether or not they'll do so more matchup dependent. And then the interesting part was, I'm going to let you listen to this clip from Coach Mitch Johnson. He was asked twice about Sochan starting, whether or not that's going to be his permanent spot going forward now that he's back from injury. And Coach Johnson didn't 100% give like a clear indication. He kind of like left it open for interpretation from my understanding.
Do you feel like Jeremy's back in the starting lineup for good?
Had a lot of guys in and out. That's a heck of a question. We'll see who's available. Hopefully he is.
But he's at that point now where he kind of lost his starting job because of injury. Do you feel like he's done enough to have a semi-permanent spot back in that starting lineup?
I think he's had a semi-permanent spot. I think we've had a lot of guys in and out, and depending on who's in and out, we've had to deal with that, right? So it's a good problem to have. Hopefully we'll have it coming forward.
So again, it's based on Coach Johnson not just coming out and saying Jeremy's the starting part of the starting lineup going forward. It is interesting that maybe the Spurs now that they are getting a lot of their players back, they may not be they still may not be the starting forward power forward every single game. Maybe like I said, maybe it ends up being matchup dependent, or Devin Vassell is still on a minutes restriction, but coming into the season we would have anticipated that he was going to be in the starting lineup, because even I think Coach Pop had said before back in training camp that Devin would have been one of the starters. So it's interesting too that once Devin Vassell's minutes restriction gets lifted, will he be a possible candidate to become a starter? And who ends up going to the bench? Because obviously this team has really Harrison Barnes has obviously been really good for the Spurs. Just Chris Paul, of course, is going to start. Wemby's going to start, and so that becomes that question of Julian Champagnie, who ended up starting for Vassell early on in the season. He's actually really come through, and he's really been a bright spot for the team with his outside shooting, his quick fire threes, being one of the consistent scorers for the team, plus his defense that he provides out there on the perimeter. He's a versatile defender as well, like Castle out there. So again, it's just an interesting question looking early on at the starting lineup situation for the Spurs. All right, so on the final topic of this episode, I want to talk about something that took place on Sunday. It didn't really take place, but it's more so like a very important date was Sunday, and that's December 15th. And here's why that was an important date. A lot of the free agents who signed their deals in the summer are now trade eligible from now until February 6th, which is the NBA trade deadline. So that's like an unofficial start, I guess you would say, to trade season. And obviously, we've already seen some deals go down where the Miami Heat sent Thomas Bryant to the Indiana Pacers. And the other trade that went down on Sunday was the Golden State Warriors acquired Dennis Schroeder from the Brooklyn Nets, and then they sent DeAnthony Melton and Reese Beekman and some second round draft picks. So again, a lot of those deals couldn't take place until that December 15th deadline was officially here, because for players like Bryant and what's his name, Melton, they had signed deals over the summer with their teams, and so now they were eligible to be traded on December 15th. So what that means for the Spurs is that now, every player before Sunday, every player on the roster was eligible to be traded, except for Chris Paul, Sandro Mamukelashvili, and also Charles Bassett, because the three of those players signed deals in July, free agent deals with the Spurs. Now that December 15th is gone, those three players are also eligible to be traded. So again, I'm not saying that the Spurs are going to trade anyone. I'm just saying that everyone on the roster is now eligible to be traded, just financially, just on the cap sheet. So I kind of just want to go through a quick rundown of where the Spurs stand, and I'll definitely get into this more trade, especially with trade rumors coming up here in the next month or two with the February 6th deadline approaching. So I just want to give a quick brief overview of where the Spurs' trade situation stands, or their financial sheet stands. So the Spurs are $9.1 million over the salary cap. The important number, though, is that they are $21 million under the tax. So if the Spurs do want to acquire someone, that's kind of the key number is, if they go out and try to acquire a player, are they looking to go over the tax or stay kind of under it? They have some room there, basically. They have $21 million under the tax to acquire a player who might have a larger salary. They are also $28.3 million under what we call the first apron. So again, there's a lot of room for the Spurs if they wanted to make some moves to bring in players or a player or two, just depending on who they're sending out and what that player's contract looks like. So again, there is some flexibility for the Spurs. Is kind of my overall takeaway going into trade season. So one way that the Spurs, one tool the Spurs have to acquire a player is called the Room MLE. So the Spurs have $3.4 million left of their Room MLE to acquire a player via trade. And so the reason why they have less money, $3.4 million, is because if you recall back in September, I believe it was, they had acquired Jalen McDaniels from the Sacramento Kings and then waived him. But in order to acquire McDaniels, they had to bring him into that part of that room MLE. I think it was like $7 million or somewhere around that amount. And so basically, they still have some money left there, and that money can be used to bring in a player via trade. But the only issue for San Antonio is that they have a full roster. So basically, if the Spurs were going to participate in a trade this upcoming season between now and February 6th, they would either have to do player for player trades, because like I said, they're already maxed out with 15 roster spots, or they would have to waive a player on a guarantee contract first and then acquire a player via trade. So again, that's the only way that the Spurs can bring someone onto the team via trade, is either going player for player or waiving someone already on a guaranteed deal, and then they'd have an open roster spot, which would allow them to take in a player. If that was the case, like, getting someone with a salary below $3.4 million, they could use the Room MLE. And then, the Spurs can trade with a lot of different teams. The only teams that they would have to be, it's a little bit tougher to make deals with, are those teams that are kind of like that are hard capped, either at the first apron or about to go over the second apron, or the teams that are clearly, beyond the second apron. If it's like a team that's beyond the second apron, those deals can only get done if, that the player the Spurs are sending out is making less than the player that the team's taking in, basically, or it has to be like a 100% salary match. So there's a lot of different configurations. I'm probably going to be writing about this a little bit more in detail in these next 2 months. But again, that's just kind of a quick overview of where the Spurs kind of stand heading into trade season. Like I said, the deadline is on February 6th. And right now, just looking at the Spurs' roster, I don't see that there's any pressing issue to try to trade someone. So we do see, if we look at just their upcoming free agents, who's going to end up being a free agent next summer, it is Chris Paul, Trey Jones also. Those two players are on the last year of their deals. Charles Bassey and Mamu as well. So those 4 players will be free agents next summer, as well as all 3 two-way players. But like I said, there's no urgency right now to try to trade Chris Paul. He's one of their starters. He's played in every game so far this season. He's really helped them with their turnaround, especially in crunch time. Trey Jones right now is still, when he is healthy, he is expected to still be their backup point guard. And then obviously Bassey and Mamu, they've been relied upon to come in and play different minutes whenever players are out due to injury or in foul situations. And so obviously there's no like pressing need to send anyone out. And then some players who the Spurs still have some time to decide, some younger players, if they want to move these players either at this deadline or maybe wait till the summer or even next season. Those players are Blake Wesley and Malachi Branham, because we have seen that they have gotten kind of inconsistent minutes. Sometimes they're playing in games, either Wesley or Branham. Sometimes they don't play at all. And so obviously, they haven't quite cracked the rotation where they're staying in games every single night. But there's no pressing reason for the Spurs to send either player out, just to get a trade done. They don't have to do it. They still have 1 more year with those 2 players under contract, and then they can make that decision of whether or not they want to, move those players via trade. So again, that was just a quick picture of where the Spurs' roster stands regarding the trade deadline approaching on February 6th. All right, so now before I close up this episode, I just want to give my prediction for the next 2 games for the Spurs. So like this past week, there was only 2 games, and again, that's how it is this week again. So on Thursday, the Spurs are hosting the Atlanta Hawks, and then on Saturday they are hosting the Portland Trailblazers. So I'm going to go ahead and go 1-1. I think they lose to the Hawks, and I think that they beat the Blazers. So I think the Spurs will go 1-1. We'll check how they did. We'll see how they do next week when I record. Should be back on, I believe, Sunday night. I think so. I'll be back to recording on a Sunday next week for next week's episode. So let's see how it goes. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this episode of the Spot Up Pod. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and leave us a rating on your favorite podcast apps and our YouTube channel. The Spot Up Pod is recorded and produced by Paul Garcia. The music for this episode was written by Vincent Garcia and Paul Garcia. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.